The grand chamber of the Galactic Council was massive beyond anything humans had seen before, and the walls stretched upward into darkness, while strange lights floated in the air like trapped stars, and Ambassador Daniel Brooks stood in the center of a circle made of smooth black stone that seemed to absorb all warmth from his body. And he had been standing there for 6 hours listening to aliens speak in languages that sounded like music and screams and grinding metal all at once. His uniform was dark blue with silver buttons, and it still looked sharp, even though sweat had begun to collect under his collar, and beside him stood Colonel Lisa Martinez, who wore the green uniform of Earth's military forces, and her face showed no emotion, but her hands were locked behind her back so tight that her fingers had gone pale and white. The chamber held representatives from 247 different species, and some looked almost human, while others were so strange that Daniel's mind struggled to understand what he was seeing. And there were beings made of crystal that caught and reflected light in rainbow patterns, and creatures that floated in the air, surrounded by clouds of purple gas, and things with too many legs or no legs at all, and eyes that numbered in the dozens or no eyes that humans could recognize. The council leader was named Thexfor, and it was one of the crystal beings, and when it spoke, its voice came from small devices that everyone wore on their clothes that translated the sounds into words they could understand, and the voice was cold and formal like a judge reading a sentence to a criminal. Humanity of Earth has been found guilty of excessive aggression and unauthorized military expansion and violation of the Protected Species Act, and the Council has reviewed all evidence and testimony, and the decision is final and cannot be appealed. Daniel wanted to shout at them and tell them they were wrong, but he knew it would do no good. And these aliens had already made up their minds before the trial even started, and they did not care about truth or justice, and they only cared about keeping humans under their control. The chamber filled with sounds of approval, and aliens made gestures that their species used to show agreement and happiness, and a large reptile covered in green scales hissed loudly, and its tongue flicked out to taste the air, and a floating mass of purple tentacles pulsed with bright colors that the translator said meant satisfaction and smugness. Earth and all human colonies are hereby expelled from the galactic community, and all trade agreements are terminated immediately, and all technology-sharing protocols are revoked and canceled, and humanity will return to its home system and remain there under quarantine, and the quarantine will be enforced by a barrier that cannot be crossed, and any vessel attempting to leave the Sol system will be destroyed without warning. Daniel felt his stomach drop, and this was worse than he had expected. And they were not just punishing Earth, but trapping humanity in their own solar system like animals in a cage. And he looked at Lisa and saw the same shock and anger in her eyes that he felt in his chest. This is a mistake, and Daniel's voice carried across the huge chamber, and hundreds of alien eyes or things like eyes turned to look at him, and we defended the Kepler colony from raiders, and we protected species too weak to protect themselves, and everything we did was to preserve life and keep innocent people safe. A tall alien with 4 eyes and skin that looked like smooth purple silk stepped forward, and her name was something Daniel could not pronounce, but the translator called her the Velaran Ambassador, and she spoke with a voice full of contempt and disdain. You acted without authorization from this council, and you built warships that exceed all treaty limitations, and you established military outposts in neutral zones without permission, and you are too dangerous and too unpredictable, and this galaxy will be safer and more peaceful without your kind spreading through it. The chamber erupted with sounds of agreement, and Daniel realized that every species here feared humanity, not because humans were evil, but because they could not control them, and humans asked too many questions and refused to follow rules that did not make sense, and most of all, humans helped the weak, and that threatened the power of the strong. We are leaving. And Daniel turned his back on the council leader, which was considered a grave insult. But he did not care anymore, and Lisa followed him, and together they walked toward the exit, and their footsteps echoed in the vast space. The crystal corridors of the council station were beautiful and cold, and light bounced through the walls, creating patterns that hurt to look at for too long. And other aliens moved through the halls, and some watched the humans pass with curiosity, while others turned away as if looking at something shameful. What do we do now? And Lisa spoke quietly so only Daniel could hear, and her voice had a slight tremble that she could not quite hide. We go home, and Daniel kept walking, and his jaw was set hard, and then we show them what humanity can really do when they stop holding us back. They reached the docking bay where 3 human ships waited, and the ships were small compared to the massive alien vessels that filled the station, but they were built with human engineering and human determination, and they would carry the delegation home. The flight back to Earth took 3 weeks, and during that time the Council activated the barrier around the Sol system, and it was made of energy that humans did not fully understand, and it glowed with a faint blue light that could be seen from every planet and moon and station in the system. On Earth, the United Earth government held an emergency session, and leaders from every nation gathered in the Assembly Hall in Geneva, and President Helen Carter stood at the podium, and her silver hair was pulled back, and her face was calm, but her eyes burned with fierce determination. They have locked us in our own home and taken away everything we worked for, and they think isolation will make us weak, and they believe we will beg to be let back into their club, and they do not understand humanity at all. She looked across the rows of seats filled with generals and scientists and diplomats and world leaders, and her voice grew stronger. They have made one critical mistake, and they gave us time, and they gave us motivation, and most importantly, they gave us a common enemy. And humanity has always done its best work when our backs are against the wall and when someone tells us we cannot do something. In the back of the room, a young scientist named Karen Foster leaned forward with interest, and beside her sat Admiral Nicole Bennett, who commanded Earth's small fleet of warships, and they both understood what the president was really saying. We are going to use this time to become stronger than they can imagine, and we will build ships and weapons and technology that will make their ancient empires look like children playing with toys. And when we break through that barrier, and we will break through it, then we will show the galaxy what humanity really means. The assembly erupted in applause, and outside the windows the barrier glowed in the darkness of space like a challenge and like a promise, and Earth began to prepare for the greatest transformation in human history. 5 years had passed since the Council locked humanity inside the Sol system, and Jacob Hayes stood on the bridge of a ship called Defiance, watching through the viewport as Mars filled his vision with its red surface now dotted with lights from human settlements. The ship was nothing like the vessels Earth had flown before the banishment, built entirely from human innovation without a single piece of alien technology in its design. Jacob had commanded merchant vessels before the exile, but now he led one of Earth's most advanced warships, a symbol of how much had changed in those 5 years. The bridge hummed with activity as crew members monitored systems and coordinated with the massive shipyards that orbited Mars in a construction complex larger than any city on Earth. Amy Sullivan sat at the tactical station and pulled up holographic displays that showed the current state of human military production. 12 heavy cruisers had been completed just this month, she reported, each one capable of fighting 3 Council vessels at once based on simulations. The Titan-class dreadnought under construction in the main yard was 60% finished and would be larger than anything humanity had ever built. Shipyard Delta was ahead of schedule on a carrier project that would launch fighter craft using magnetic catapults rather than traditional methods. Jacob nodded and asked about the colonies, knowing that ships meant nothing without the industrial base to support them. The report was encouraging in ways that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. Venus was being terraformed using atmospheric processors designed by a scientist named Greg Patterson, machines that could convert the toxic atmosphere into breathable air over the course of decades. Mars had grown from a collection of research outposts to a thriving world with 12 million inhabitants, cities under protective domes that stretched for kilometers, farms growing food in underground caverns, and universities training the next generation of engineers and soldiers. The asteroid belt colonies were producing minerals at twice the projected rate, using automated mining systems that never tired and never complained. Every planet and moon in the Sol system had become part of an economic machine focused on a single goal: making humanity strong enough to break free. Jacob pulled up another display showing military readiness, and the numbers impressed even him. General Chris Morgan, the head of Earth's combined military forces, reported 5 million soldiers fully trained and ready for deployment. Another 10 million were in various stages of training, learning everything from basic combat to advanced starship operations. Amy asked a question that Jacob knew others were asking as well. Why build such a massive military force when the quarantine barrier kept everyone out just as effectively as it kept humans in? Jacob smiled, but there was no humor in the expression. He explained that the barrier was powered by Council technology, and everything they built could be understood and eventually broken. Humanity was not building a military to sit idle. They were building it to use the moment they broke through that barrier, and they would not break it until they were ready to show the galaxy something it had never seen before. Deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon, in laboratories carved from solid rock and shielded from any possible observation, Karen Foster examined results from the latest weapons test. The experimental plasma cannon had just punched through 6 meters of armor plate in a single sustained burst. Armor that was rated to withstand anything the Council species currently used. Her assistant Peter Quinn stared at the data with an expression mixing awe and slight fear. He asked how humanity had developed such advanced weapons so quickly, given that 5 years ago they were using technology barely more advanced than what the Council provided to new member species. Karen adjusted her glasses and explained what should have been obvious to anyone paying attention. Earth had stopped trying to improve alien technology and instead went back to fundamental principles, designing weapons from scratch using physics and engineering that the Council species had never fully explored. The Council had been using essentially the same weapons for 10,000 years, making small improvements but never revolutionary changes. Humanity had been innovating desperately for 5 years with unlimited funding, and the best minds of an entire species focused on the single problem of survival. She pulled up schematics that showed dozens of projects in various stages of development. The quantum displacement drive would allow human ships to teleport short distances in battle, something no Council vessel could do. The neural command system would link ship computers directly to crew thoughts, giving reaction times measured in milliseconds instead of seconds. Nanite repair systems would let ships heal damage in real time, sealing hull breaches and rerouting damaged systems automatically. Peter asked when Command planned to make their move, and Karen told him the same thing everyone said when that question came up. When humanity was ready, not a day sooner and not a day later. The entire species had learned patience during these 5 years, learned to work toward a goal that might take decades to achieve. They had been given time by the Council's arrogance, and they were using every second of it. On Earth, in the city of New Geneva that had grown into the diplomatic capital of the United Earth government, Frank Morris coordinated efforts that most people did not know existed. Despite the quarantine barrier, humanity had found ways to monitor Council communications using a network of hidden listening posts and creative signal analysis. The information they gathered painted a troubling picture of galactic politics. The Kathrani had been conducting raids on independent systems that lacked Council protection. The Vrexians were demanding tribute from weaker species in exchange for not attacking them. The Council did nothing about any of it because the aggressors had powerful political allies and the victims had none. Frank presented his findings to President Carter, who was now in her 2nd term and looked older than her years from the stress of leading humanity through its greatest crisis. She read through reports of distress calls from 15 different species begging for help that never came, appeals to the Council that were ignored or dismissed. The hypocrisy was staggering, she said. Earth had been banished for defending others, but now the Council allowed aggression and exploitation because it was politically convenient. Frank agreed and suggested that this created an opportunity. Every species that the Council abandoned was a potential ally. Every distress call was a chance to show that humanity would help where the Council would not. President Carter gave orders to catalog every request for help, every instance of Council neglect, every species that suffered while the politicians debated. When Earth broke through the quarantine, they would need friends and allies. There was no better way to make friends than saving someone when they needed it most. The work continued day after day, listening posts recording transmissions, analysts sorting through data, diplomats preparing contact protocols for species that Earth had never officially met. Humanity was not just building ships and weapons during these 5 years. They were building a strategy for the galaxy they would enter when the barrier fell. Jacob stood on the Bridge of Defiance and looked at Mars and thought about all the activity happening throughout the Sol system. Millions of people working toward a single goal, building an empire not of conquest but of capability. The Council thought they had caged a dangerous animal, but they had actually given that animal time to evolve into something far more dangerous. In 5 more years, Jacob thought, maybe less if progress continued at current rates, humanity would be ready. The barrier would fall and the galaxy would discover what happens when you try to suppress a species that refuses to accept limitations. He smiled and turned back to his displays, checking on the construction schedules and training reports. There was still so much work to do. 10 years after the Council had locked humanity away, Nicole Bennett stood in the command center of a ship called Justice, a vessel so massive that it took nearly a minute to walk from bow to stern, even at a brisk pace. The ship stretched 5 kilometers through space and carried enough firepower to level a small moon. Built in the secret shipyards of Mars and assembled in the darkness between planets, where no Council sensors could detect it. Around her position at the command station, 300 warships waited in perfect formation, carriers and battleships and cruisers and destroyers all bearing the blue and white insignia of the United Earth Fleet. Every ship had been built in the decade of isolation. Every weapon had been designed by human minds working without alien influence. Every system had been tested and retested until it performed beyond any reasonable expectation. Ryan Scott, her operations officer, announced that all ships reported ready for the operation. Nicole looked at the shimmering barrier that had imprisoned her species for a decade, a wall of energy that the Council believed was unbreakable by any technology in the galaxy. Karen Foster's team had spent 3 years analyzing the barrier's properties from the inside, running thousands of simulations, and they believed they had found its weakness. Everything came down to this moment, whether humanity would remain caged or break free. Nicole gave the order for all ships to target a single point in the barrier, at coordinates that Foster's team had marked as the optimal stress point. 300 ships aligned their weapons with precision that would have been impossible without the neural command systems that linked crews to their vessels. The word came from Nicole's lips, a simple command that carried the weight of 10 years of preparation. Fire, thousands of weapons discharged in perfect synchronization, quantum displacement cannons sending invisible pulses of warped space-time at a single point. For a moment, the barrier blazed brighter than a star, energy bleeding off in spectacular waves of color. Then it shattered like glass struck by a hammer, fragments dissolving into nothing as the underlying structure collapsed. Alarms immediately screamed on the Council monitoring station positioned just outside the Sol system, a facility designed to watch for any attempt at escape and respond with overwhelming force. The Valoran commander named Zelthax stared at his displays and could not believe what they showed. The barrier had been designed by the greatest minds in Council history, built to contain any species regardless of their technology level, powered by generators that drew energy from subspace itself. Nothing should have been able to break it, certainly not a species that had been isolated from galactic technology for a decade. His tactical officer reported with a shaking voice that sensors detected 300 warships emerging from the Sol system, and their energy signatures were off any known scale. Zelthax ordered immediate contact with the nearest Council fleet and activation of all defense stations, knowing even as he gave the orders that the response would come too late. The human fleet did not attack the monitoring station despite having every reason to do so. Instead, they formed a defensive perimeter around the breach point and began broadcasting a message on every frequency that the Council used for official communications. Nicole's face appeared on communication devices throughout Council space, her expression calm but her eyes showing steel underneath. She identified herself as Fleet Admiral of the United Earth Fleet and stated that humanity had been imprisoned for 10 years, while the Council tried to make them weak. Instead, those 10 years had made humanity stronger than the Council could possibly imagine. Earth was not looking for revenge despite having every justification for it. Instead, they were offering protection to any species that wanted to live free from Council tyranny, free from political games, free from the hierarchy that valued some lives over others. The message repeated in every language that Council species used, and within hours it had spread across half the galaxy. The Council emergency session convened faster than it ever had before, delegates rushing to the chamber still wearing sleeping clothes or casual garments. Thexvor, still leading the Council after 10 years, demanded answers from anyone who could provide them. How had the humans broken through a barrier that was supposed to be unbreakable? What were they looking at when sensors showed energy signatures that exceeded anything in Council databases? A military coordinator named Vox, a heavily armored being from a species that specialized in warfare, displayed analysis of the human fleet that made several delegates gasp audibly. The smallest human ships outgunned Council heavy cruisers according to the analysis. Their technology appeared to be at least 2 generations beyond anything the Council possessed, and intelligence suggested that this fleet represented only a fraction of Earth's total military capacity. The Vrexian delegate demanded immediate military action to destroy the human fleet before it could grow stronger. Vox asked a simple question in response: with what forces would they attack? The Council fleet would take weeks to assemble in sufficient numbers, and by then the humans could have reinforcements. More importantly, 12 minor civilizations had already responded positively to the human message, and if the Council attacked Earth, those species might side with the humans out of spite, or hope for a better alternative. The galaxy could face a civil war that would make the ancient conflicts look like minor disagreements. The debate raged through the night and into the next day, hawks demanding action while doves counseled caution. Finally, the Council voted to send a diplomatic delegation to negotiate terms, hoping they could salvage something from the disaster. The delegation arrived aboard Justice 3 days later, and Daniel Brooks, now showing gray in his hair but still sharp in his mind, met them in a conference room that had been designed to accommodate multiple species. He recognized none of the delegates from his time on the Council, the old guard having been replaced by younger politicians who had inherited a crisis not of their making. The lead negotiator, a scholarly Kathrani named Veltoth, began by stating that the Council wished to discuss terms for Earth's readmission to the galactic community. Daniel let the words hang in the air for a long moment before responding with a single word that seemed to echo in the silence: no. The Kathrani's tentacles writhed in confusion, and he asked Daniel to clarify, because surely Earth wanted to rejoin galactic society after 10 years of isolation. Daniel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He explained that Earth had no interest in rejoining an organization that had betrayed them, that had left them to rot while hoping they would become desperate enough to accept any terms offered. Humanity had created something better during their isolation, Daniel continued. They called it the Terran Alliance, and it operated on principles completely different from the Council. Any species that joined received full military protection without question or political consideration. They received fair trade agreements based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Most importantly, they received the right to self-determination, the freedom to govern themselves without interference from larger powers. No species would dictate terms to another. No species would be abandoned when they needed help. No species would be valued less because they lacked political connections. Veltoth objected that Earth was creating a rival power bloc that would destabilize the galaxy and cause conflict. Daniel leaned forward, and his voice took on an edge that made the translator struggle to convey the emotion behind his words. The galaxy was already unstable, he said. The Council just had not noticed because they were too busy protecting the powerful while ignoring the weak. Distress calls went unanswered, raids went unpunished, exploitation went unchallenged, all because the victims lacked political influence. That ended now. The Terran Alliance would respond to every call for help, would protect every species that asked for protection, would stand against aggression regardless of who committed it. The Council could join this new order or stand against it, but they could not stop it because the time when they held all the power had ended the moment that barrier shattered. The delegation left Justice without reaching any agreement and returned to Council space to report complete failure. Daniel watched their ship depart and turned to Lisa Martinez, who had stood silently through the entire meeting. She asked if he thought the Council would accept the new reality or fight against it. Daniel considered the question while watching stars through the viewport. Some would accept it, he said. Some would fight. But in the end it would not matter, because humanity had proven something that the Council had forgotten: over 10,000 years of comfortable dominance. Real power did not come from ancient traditions or political structures. It came from being willing to stand up for what was right even when doing so carried terrible cost. Earth had paid that cost during 10 years of isolation, and now they were strong enough to ensure no other species would have to pay it alone. 3 years after humanity broke through the quarantine barrier, the Terran Alliance had grown beyond anything the Council thought possible, now including 47 member species that ranged from ancient civilizations fallen on hard times to young species barely reaching for the stars. Eric Palmer commanded a defense station that orbited a planet called New Terra, humanity's first colony established in the years after breaking free. The planet had been disputed territory before Earth arrived, claimed by multiple council species but defended by none, leaving the inhabitants vulnerable to pirates and raiders who took whatever they wanted. Earth had offered protection and built infrastructure and welcomed refugees from a dozen worlds, turning New Terra into a symbol of what the Alliance represented. Michelle Grant, his censor officer, reported another convoy requesting asylum, 8 freighters from the Peleran system, carrying families who had fled their homeworld after the Council refused to intervene against systematic exploitation. Eric ordered them guided to the landing platforms and contacted the settlement authority to prepare additional housing. It was the same pattern repeated across Alliance space almost daily. Species that had been marginalized or exploited or simply ignored by the Council were abandoning their traditional territories and seeking protection under the blue and white flag. They brought knowledge and resources, and most importantly, they brought loyalty born from gratitude rather than fear or political calculation. In the Grand Assembly Hall of New Geneva, expanded now to accommodate representatives from dozens of species with different environmental requirements, Victoria Hayes presided over the Alliance Council. The chamber had been designed with equality as the founding principle, every member species having the same sized seat and the same voting power regardless of their military strength or economic output. She announced that the Kepler Mining Collective had requested membership, a group of 5 species that had worked the mineral-rich asteroid fields of their system for generations while paying protection money to Vrexian raiders. They offered exclusive mining rights in exchange for Alliance protection, rights that would make several Earth corporations very wealthy. The vote was unanimous, as it almost always was when a species needed help, rather than wanting to help themselves. Victoria approved the application and turned to Nicole Bennett, who participated remotely from her flagship somewhere in deep space. She ordered the 4th Fleet to deploy to Kepler space immediately and establish orbital defense stations. The protection fee was now 0, and anyone attempting to collect tribute would face consequences that Nicole left deliberately vague. The fleet would arrive within 2 weeks and begin construction of permanent defenses within a month. The Kepler Collective sent messages of thanks that brought tears to several delegates who remembered their own species being saved by Alliance. Intervention. The Galactic Council watched these developments, with alarm that grew with each passing month. In an emergency session that had become depressingly routine, Thexvor addressed an assembly that looked notably smaller than it had 3 years ago. 47 systems had left Council jurisdiction to join the Terran Alliance, and dozens more were openly considering the move. Trade routes were being rerouted through Alliance-controlled space because human protection made commerce safer. Merchant ships that once paid fees to multiple authorities now paid nothing and received guaranteed safe passage. Worst of all, from the Council's perspective, humanity was making them look like villains simply by doing what the Council should have been doing all along. A young Velaran named Marilla stood to speak, representing a colony world that had nearly joined the Alliance before political pressure forced them to remain with the Council. She stated plainly that the humans had exposed what the Council had become over thousands of years, a bureaucracy more concerned with maintaining power than protecting people. The Kathrani delegate warned her that such talk bordered on treason, but Marilla continued without hesitation. She was not alone in thinking this way, she said. The humans had offered her colony protection when raiders attacked, and the Council had told them to solve their own problems because they lacked political influence. Her people had declined Alliance membership out of loyalty, but she was beginning to think that loyalty was misplaced when it protected an institution that refused to protect them. The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence because many delegates shared her thoughts, even if they lacked the courage to voice them. Cracks were forming in the Council's unity, cracks that would widen with each species that chose the Alliance over tradition. On Earth, young men and women graduated from the Terran Naval Academy in ceremonies that would have been impossible before the banishment. Kevin Morris stood with 300 fellow graduates representing 12 different species, all wearing the same uniform regardless of whether they had 2 legs or 6 or none at all. The integration of alien personnel into Earth's military had been controversial when first proposed, but it had proven remarkably successful. Once people realized that shared values mattered, more than shared biology, Admiral Bennett addressed the graduates in a speech that was broadcast across Alliance space. She told them they were the future not just of Earth, but of a galaxy where species worked together as equals rather than in hierarchy. The old powers had tried to maintain order through fear and political manipulation, but the alliance would create peace through mutual respect and cooperation. Every species had something to contribute, and every contribution had value regardless of its source. Kevin looked at the graduates around him and saw the future that Bennett described. Sarah Williams came from the Mars colonies and had lost family to raiders before the alliance existed. Kelvin was a young Pelleran whose family had been saved by Earth forces during one of the early rescue missions. Tiramoth had defected from the Kathrani military because she refused to participate in raids against defenseless colonies. They came from different worlds and different backgrounds, but they were united by belief in something larger than themselves. The galaxy could be better than it was, and they would help make it better. Training had been difficult because different species had different physical capabilities and different ways of thinking, but instructors had learned to focus on strengths rather than trying to force everyone into the same mold. Kelvin excelled at technical systems because Pelleran minds processed multiple data streams simultaneously. Tiramoth was unmatched at tactical planning because Kathrani culture had studied warfare for millennia. Sarah was the best pilot in her class because humans had a natural talent for three-dimensional spatial reasoning. The ceremony ended with the graduates taking an oath that had been carefully written to respect the beliefs of every alliance species. They swore to protect the innocent, to defend the weak, to treat all species with respect, and to uphold the principles of the alliance even at cost to themselves. Kevin felt the weight of those words as he spoke them, knowing that he might be called to die for species he had never met, for people he would never know, simply because they needed help, and the alliance had promised to provide it. He accepted that weight willingly because he had seen what happened when the powerful refused to help the powerless. The Council had shown him what not to be, and the Alliance had shown him what he could become. After the ceremony, graduates received their assignments to various ships and stations throughout Alliance space. Kevin was assigned to a cruiser called Steadfast that patrolled the border regions where Council space met Alliance territory. It was dangerous duty because some Council species still launched raids despite knowing they might face human retaliation. The orders were clear: protect Alliance members and offer assistance to anyone who requested it regardless of their political affiliation. Sarah received assignment to a carrier group. Kelvin would serve on a technical research vessel, and Tiramoth surprised no one by joining the Tactical Planning Division at Fleet Headquarters. They celebrated together that night, sharing drinks and stories in a bar that had been established specifically to accommodate multiple species. The owner was a refugee from a world the Council had abandoned, and she refused payment from anyone wearing an Alliance uniform. Kevin sat with his friends and thought about the future, about the inevitable conflict with Council hardliners who would never accept the new order, about the species still suffering under exploitation or neglect, about the work that remained before the Alliance vision became reality across the galaxy. It seemed overwhelming when considered all at once, but then he remembered something an instructor had told them during training. You cannot change the galaxy in a day, but you can help one person today, and that person might help another tomorrow, and eventually the galaxy changes itself. Kevin raised his glass and his friends joined him in a toast to the Alliance and to the future they would build together. 5 years after breaking the quarantine, the confrontation that everyone knew was coming finally arrived in the form of a Vrexian armada numbering 2,000 warships assembled at the edge of Alliance space. The Vrexian Empire had been losing influence steadily as species under their protection abandoned them for the Alliance, taking their tribute payments and their fear with them. Now the Vrexians had convinced several hardline Council members to support military action, arguing that the Alliance had to be destroyed before it grew too powerful to stop. They issued an ultimatum that was broadcast across the galaxy. The Terran Alliance would dissolve immediately, and all member species would return to Council authority or face complete destruction. Nicole Bennett stood on the Bridge of Justice and looked at the tactical display, showing 800 Alliance vessels assembled to meet the threat. Ryan Scott pointed out what everyone could see, that the Vrexians outnumbered them more than 2 to 1, and conventional military wisdom said that attackers needed at least 3 to 1 odds to overcome defensive advantages. Nicole asked about the status of the Quantum Displacement Network, a system of relay stations that had been secretly positioned throughout the sector over the past year. Ryan confirmed that all nodes were active, and the fleet could deploy anywhere within the combat zone in a matter of seconds. The technology gave Alliance forces mobility that no other military possessed, and Nicole intended to use that advantage to its fullest. The Rexian fleet admiral, a warrior named Crexthan, who had won dozens of battles during his long career, broadcast his final warning. He demanded that humans surrender immediately and promised mercy to Alliance members who abandoned Earth before the fighting started. His threat to burn every world humanity had touched was delivered with absolute confidence, born from commanding the largest fleet assembled in recent history. Nicole's response was broadcast not just to the Rexian fleet, but across the entire sector, so that anyone watching would understand what was about to happen. She stated that humanity had learned an important lesson during their banishment, that when you try to cage something wild, it does not become tame, it becomes dangerous. The battle began with the Rexian fleet advancing in traditional formation, a massive hammer designed to smash through defensive lines through sheer weight of numbers. Their ships moved in coordinated groups, covering each other's weak points and concentrating fire on single targets to overwhelm shields and armor. It was a doctrine that had worked for centuries against opponents who fought in similar ways. Then the entire Alliance fleet vanished from sensors. Quantum displacement drives activated simultaneously across 800 vessels, and they teleported across the battlefield, appearing behind and beside and above the Rexian formation. The enemy fleet found itself surrounded by opponents who had been in front of them just seconds before. Nicole gave the order for all ships to fire at will, and the Alliance fleet unleashed weapons that the galaxy had never seen in combat. Plasma cannons burned through shields in seconds rather than minutes, their focused beams cutting through energy barriers as if they did not exist. Quantum torpedoes phased through armor plating to detonate inside enemy ships, destroying them from within. Nanite swarms launched from missile tubes and spread across Rexian hulls, disabling weapon systems and life support with microscopic machines that could not be stopped by conventional defenses. Graviton projectors created artificial gravity wells that tore ships apart with forces that exceeded their structural limits. The first minute of combat saw 200 Rexian vessels destroyed or disabled, their debris spreading across the battle zone in clouds of shattered metal and frozen atmosphere. The survivors broke formation and tried to regroup, commanders shouting orders into communication systems that were being jammed by Alliance electronic warfare. Ryan reported that the enemy was attempting to retreat and asked for permission to pursue. Nicole ordered the fleet to let them go, but to disable their long-range communication systems first. She wanted the Rexian survivors to limp home and tell their government exactly what had happened. Wanted them to spread the word that attacking the Alliance meant facing technology and tactics that made traditional warfare obsolete. The battle lasted 3 hours, and, when it ended, the Rexian fleet had lost over half its vessels, with another 300 so damaged they had to be towed home by their own support ships. The Alliance had lost 4 ships to lucky hits that penetrated their defenses, with another 12 damaged but repairable thanks to the nanite systems that sealed hull breaches and rerouted damaged systems automatically. Eric Palmer, commanding a heavy cruiser in the battle, received surrender requests from 200 Rexian vessels whose crews preferred asylum to returning home in disgrace. Nicole made a decision that would define how the galaxy viewed the Alliance going forward. She granted every request for asylum and offered positions in the Alliance fleet to any warrior who would swear to protect the weak rather than prey on them. News of the battle reached the Galactic Council within hours, and the chamber erupted into chaos as delegates argued about appropriate responses. Some called for immediate military mobilization, others counseled negotiation. Still others suggested that perhaps the time had come to accept that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. Thexfor tried to maintain order while knowing that his authority had been slipping since the moment Earth broke the quarantine. Marilla stood and made a proposal that shocked the more conservative delegates. She moved that the Council dissolve its current structure and negotiate a merger with the Terran Alliance, accepting that the old ways of maintaining order had failed and new approaches were needed. The debate that followed lasted 3 days and became heated enough that security had to separate delegates, who came close to physical confrontation. The old guard fought desperately to preserve their power, while reformists argued that joining the Alliance was the only way to remain relevant in the new galactic order. The vote, when it finally came, was so close that it had to be counted 3 times to ensure accuracy. The motion to negotiate with the Alliance passed by a margin of just 3 votes out of over 200 cast. The old guard had lost its grip on power, and everyone knew that the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the battle, Daniel Brooks stood in a newly constructed diplomatic hall on a neutral station, positioned between Council and Alliance space. Behind him were representatives of 47 Alliance member species, each one present because they chose to be rather than because they were forced by treaty or tradition. Facing him were reformist council members who had won the political battle to negotiate, led by Veltoth, who had been part of the original delegation sent to Earth after the quarantine broke. Daniel spoke first and laid out the principles that would govern any merger. The new organization would have one simple rule: no species would rule over another. All members would have equal voice in decisions. All members would receive equal protection regardless of their size or power. All members would be free to govern themselves without interference. Veltoth asked the question that everyone wanted answered. What would happen if stronger species tried to dominate weaker ones under the new system? Daniel's response was immediate and firm. The full might of Earth and its allies would stop them, just as it had been stopping them for 5 years, and would continue stopping them for the next 5,000 years. The Terran Alliance had built its reputation on protecting those who could not protect themselves, and that would never change regardless of what the organization was called or how it was structured. The treaty was signed that day with representatives from both sides applying their various methods of authentication, from simple signatures to complex genetic markers. The Galactic Council officially dissolved and was replaced by the Galactic Union, an organization built on principles of equality and mutual defense rather than hierarchy and political influence. Earth became the guarantor of the new order, its military ensuring that no species could dominate another, its diplomats mediating disputes between members, its resources helping to rebuild worlds that had been exploited or neglected. President Helen Carter addressed humanity in a speech from the White House, her final major address before retirement. She reminded people that the Council had tried to cage humanity, to limit them, to make them small and insignificant. Instead, they had forced Earth to become greater than anyone imagined, not through conquest or domination, but through standing up for those who could not stand for themselves. Nicole Bennett looked out from Justice at a fleet that now numbered 3,000 vessels representing over 100 species, all working together to patrol a galaxy that was slowly becoming more peaceful. The quarantine barrier that once imprisoned humanity had been completely dismantled, its components recycled into defense stations protecting Alliance worlds. Ryan asked what she was thinking as she stared out at the stars. Nicole smiled and said she was thinking about what the Council leader had said 15 years ago, that humanity was too dangerous and too unpredictable. He had been right, but not in the way he thought. Humanity was dangerous to corrupt systems and unpredictable because they refused to accept that might makes right. She turned from the viewport and walked back,